restless spirits, ghosts, and we talk about all kinds of things on our little podcast, and we always want to try to bring it back home from time to time. Our last few episodes, we've definitely traveled abroad a little bit. So we thought we'd bring it back home and talk about some Missouri ghost stories this time around.
Missouri ghost stories.
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Closed-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
So, when we decided to talk about Missouri ghost stories, there's a lot of material out there, and there's a lot of anecdotal little stories.
A lot of little seeds, you might say.
I decided I would tackle Springfield, Missouri a little bit, since it's pretty close to home. We've talked about Lebanon in the past, so I kind of didn't want to go there.
Right. So,
one of the first ones I was going to talk about was Phelps Grove Park. And Phelps Grove Park is home to a wandering spirit. She's supposed to be fairly new to the park, to be honest. The park has been around for a while, but she was supposedly killed in an automobile accident. And it was on the day of her wedding, as her and her groom were driving through the park. They lost control of the car, they crashed, and they were both killed in the wreck.
Wow.
Now they refer to her as the Bride Under the Bridge, which is
I've actually heard that, yes.
She's often seen near the third bridge in the park at night. Usually she'll be holding the hem of her gown as a lady would as she walks. But where her face would be, there is only darkness. I'm going to be honest, I tried to dig around into the history of some of these stories, and I didn't find a lot. So
no, like, actual newspaper article or anything of where a crash occurred?
So honestly, on this one, that's pretty much about all I've got. Drury University.
Oh, yes.
Got a little bit of history here. It was first opened September 25th, 1873. And, old colleges, old buildings like that, they're often reported to have hauntings. Of course, if you're going to have a haunted building, Drury reportedly was built on Indian burial grounds.
Oh, I've heard that story around here a lot.
Yeah. So, it seems, I think I used this joke once before, but with as much haunting and bad luck as the United States has, I think the whole place was built on Indian burial grounds.
Absolutely.
Later, it was also, Civil War. There was Civil War action in the area. So, of course, there's a lot of residual energy that could be there. In 1966, Smith Hall, the woman's dorm, was built in an area that used to be home to several old Victorian houses. They're going to demolish those houses to make way for the hall. It is, like I said, a woman's dorm. One of those homes had a little girl who had burned to death, trying to retrieve her personal little teddy bear from the house as it burned.
Well, that's tragic.
Yeah. A lot of the students claim that she still haunts the hall to this very day. She's actually kind of an interesting little spirit. Many have witnessed her, dressed in pink, wandering the halls. Some have reportedly even taken pictures of her, which, to be honest, I was unable to find. The students will, come back from being out and find their locked dorm room door open and unlocked. She'll pull drawers out of dressers.
Kind of a little prankster here.
Occasionally, people will find teddy bears sitting in the middle of the room. Now, that one,
I could see college kids.
I got to admit, I don't think she's
that.
Manifesting these teddy bears out of nowhere. But I thought, they could be kids playing jokes on each other.
Absolutely. I could totally see that.
But other kids who report having personal teddy bears that they bring with them say that they will move in the night. And they will find them in completely different locations than they were the night before.
That's a bit creepy.
And then, sort of unrelated, one student also told of an unplugged phone that would ring in the night. So, I don't know if that's she's responsible for that or not. Then there's also Clara Thompson Hall on Drury University, where students claim that pianos will play themselves and doors will open and close of their own accord.
Now, you mentioned Springfield. Are you going to touch on Pythian Castle?
I don't have it here. If you have some stuff on that.
It's been probably 4, if not 5 more years ago. For my birthday, Sarah, my wife, bought us tickets to go investigate Pythian Castle. For those of you who may not be familiar with Pythian Castle, it was built as an orphanage. Later, it was owned by the U.S. military. Paranormal Task Force and Ozarks Paranormal Society.
Yeah, they have a documentary.
They have made documentaries.
I don't remember the name of it.
They have actually put their brand of certification that this is truly a haunted castle with Pythian Castle. It's still open today, obviously, for visitors, for tours. 40,000 square foot castle, multiple levels, multiple floors, including what some people call a dungeon, but that was used during World War II to hold some prisoners of war. There is a full-blown theater, like where Charlie Chaplin has performed and stuff, theater seats and everything there. But that place, on my birthday, we got the first, and you may have heard me mention it before, the headless apparition of the Victorian lady that was in that theater back room. Some very, very strange light anomalies when we were taking pictures, especially down in the lower floors in the basement, that would look like blue lightning that would travel across the room when you would take the picture. Might show up in one picture out of 20. It's really random, really weird. Couldn't really ever explain that. Yeah, definitely some hauntings and things that go bump in the night there.
In the Paranormal Task Force documentary, if I remember correctly, they talk about a violent shadow entity that's down below. Yes,
kind of possibly a caretaker or worked on the place growing up. A dark entity as a male, usually found down in one of the tunnels of the basement.
Yeah, something about pipes.
Beats on the pipes.
Yeah, I remember that.
In one of the TV documentaries, they actually had a camera shooting down that way, and EVPs and everything was going off, and you could see this black shadow of a man, and he just kept coming closer and closer, and then just kind of vanished in thin air.
Yeah, and then there's like an attic room with a child spirit, if I remember correctly.
I think that was one of the head honchos, if you will's office. There is a very long stairway, and I think it travels like straight up like 2 floors and leads up to a room that faces out the very front, off the front porch. And in the TV documentary, Children of the Grave, I believe I think that was the name of it. The Booth brothers produced that. They had some cameras and stuff up there, and they actually got like child's fingerprints that appeared on the window while they were recording. Some sensors had went off that there was motion and movement up there when no one was up there and the door was actually locked.
I had entertained the idea of taking my son there. He wants to do a real-life ghost hunt, which is something, unfortunately, he hasn't been able to do. It's not as easy as it sounds when you're an amateur.
Yes, yeah.
Money's an issue.
Well, you can go to the Pythian Castle. One of the issues, I will say, and I don't mean to derail it at all, but you want a smaller group. Don't go with 50 people, because they'll turn like 10 people loose on 5 floors, and it's so contaminated with recordings and stuff, you really don't. You don't get the best of the experience.
You don't know what you're getting.
Yeah, but go for a smaller group.
We got one more we're going to talk about for the Springfield area, and I'm going to talk about the Landers Theater.
Oh, yes.
Now, theaters have a long history of being haunted. There's a lot of shadowy actors on the stage or shadowy figures in the crowd. A little bit of history here. It was built in 1909, and the Landers Theater in its lifetime had hosted such artists as Lillian Russell, John Philip Sousa, Lon Chaney, and Fanny Brice, which I got to admit, I hadn't heard of a couple of them, but they were in the list of celebrities. It was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1977 and is said to be home to a few spirits. On December 17th, 1920, there was a major fire there, and it took the life, unfortunately, of a janitor who was working there. And the theater itself had to remain closed for quite some time for renovation and repair. Now, according to some, the old janitor is still often seen in the balcony by actors on stage. You'll see him up there, walking around, still doing his job, I guess.
Still doing his thing.
There's another spirit that's never seen from inside the theater, but often seen from outside. She's described as a tall woman with long blonde hair, dressed in Elizabethan-era clothing. And she will peek through a fourth-floor window at passersby on the street below.
Creepy.
She's never been seen from inside the theater, however.
Huh.
Now, other occurrences in the theater involved unplugged lights that are turned on and off on their own. People often feel as if they're being followed. People might occasionally feel a tap on their shoulder, which I kind of chalk that up to the old Usher, tap on the shoulder. Hey, mister. And oftentimes there are apparitions glimpsed throughout the building. I did find one eyewitness account of a person who had seen two different, I'm going to say entities, for lack of a better phrase.
All right.
One was referred to as the green orb, which appeared exactly as described, but about 5 feet tall and very bright in color.
That's a big orb, 5 feet tall.
Yeah. The other day they described as the black void. The person said they felt uneasy as they were making their way through the theater, stopped to look around and see if maybe they could figure out why they had this feeling. And they looked up at the fire escapes above and saw a black void between the first and second balcony exits. Said it was like looking into a black hole that you couldn't see through it. It was just pitch black.
Ooh.
Almost. They said like a black hole, almost like a portal even maybe, but just a pitch black, void, if you will.
Scary.
So definitely the black void is fitting.
Well, as we started talking about doing this podcast, I admitted to Bill I kind of fell down the rabbit hole, so to speak. Lemp Mansion in St. Louis, Missouri.
Now, you and I have talked about it before. You have some firsthand stories.
Got a lot of firsthand stories, and there's just a ton of history of creepiness, darkness, weird things. Maybe some people haven't heard of the Lemp Mansion, but it is perched atop a hill there inside of St. Louis. The mansion itself was built back in the 1890s. But what you might not know is its sinister desire for taking lives of the Lemp family in particular.
Yeah, and I know we've discussed that.
A lot of suicides from the family that took place there in the house. And, of course, there's the fact that it hides a host of underground caverns and tunnels that run beneath it, and a lot of St. Louis, which was built, of course, right there on the river. It holds a lot of secrets. Obviously, it's probably one of the most famous, or shall we say infamous, haunted places, not only in Missouri, but it's making the top 5 and top 10 across America. In 1838, Johann Adam Lemp made his voyage from Germany, joining thousands of immigrants in the St. Louis area. He started building the Lemp fortune by first opening a grocery store. Vinegar was his number one staple there in the grocery store. I thought that was a little odd. However, in this, he started getting some money, and he started making his own brewery for lager beer. Naturally, it found its niche amongst all the German immigrants that had come to the St. Louis area, but also it had a totally different flavor and a taste than any of the other beers here in America, so it sparked some interest here in America as well. Just so happened that when he purchased the property, that he had the grocery store and started opening the brewery, that he discovered there were underground caves that was naturally underneath. Now, these were no big secret. A lot of this area was called the Cherokee Caves, obviously from the Indians who had used them way back many, many years ago. They had taken forms of all kinds of things. The tunnels and caverns, to put it in perspective, we're not talking like that you crawl through, not even that you walk through, but they had went through, poured cement, leveled the floors, put archways in. Some of these are so large that they've held carnivals in.
I was gonna ask, did they use those caverns in any way? I know, like, they used to use caves to store, cold goods and stuff like that.
Absolutely. What I started to say with the beer, and especially with the German lager, it is best to keep it in a cool area. So he kind of fell into this, and directly underneath the Lemp Brewery, he reconditioned a lot of the rooms, opened them up, made them customized round rooms where barrels could be set up in and stacked properly. And that was his beer storage. Now, underneath that, various different generations of the Lemp men also had a swimming pool that was installed, a bowling alley that was installed, and once again, a theater that we've touched upon several times. all of which are now pretty much sealed off to the public. They are open by special arrangements like around Halloween and stuff. But a lot of ghosts and spirits seem to haunt not only the house up above, but those tunnels down below and beneath. So approximately 40 different breweries dotted the horizon lines there in St. Louis when the original founder, Johann Adam Lemp, had passed on the business to his son, William J. Lemp. By 1870, the Lemp Brewery was the absolute largest in all of St. Louis, which included Falstaff beer, which was produced gaining national exposure. That was a part of Lemp beer. Later on, another company actually purchased the name Falstaff off the Lemp Brewery, and it's still in production even today. Now, Williams, the son of the founder, daughter is named Hilda. She later married into yet another popular St. Louis beer factory, which was Gustav Pabst of Pabst Beer. So they're definitely keeping it in the brew family, if you know what I mean. Now, William Jr.'s wife, Lillian, is a very colorful person, still considers to haunt the mansion today. She was considered by many the perfect trophy wife, and she was called the Lavender Lady. One of the rooms there in the Lemp Mansion is the Lavender Lady Room.
That's a good ghost name.
Very well. I thought that flows off the tongue quite nicely. Because she often dressed in lavender colors, even to the point she was so obsessed that she dyed the horse carriage harnesses in lavender color so that when she would go out for her rides that everything would match. And obviously, here comes the Lavender Lady. The sad part about this, she was a very beautiful woman that by all accounts, but her husband, William Jr., was not a faithful husband. He had some what was called wild parties down below in the tunnels in the cave. And again, at that time, you have to consider the time frame. Men and women were very often segregated. The women were not allowed down into those areas where they had cigar smoking and brewery tastings and quite honestly, even proof of a brothel that all took place down there.
Yeah, I'm sure you wouldn't want your wife to know that.
And walk in on that. No, hon, seriously, it's not what it looks like. It's everything that it looks like. So next, one of the next colorful figures that we'll find besides the Lavender Lady is Zeke the Monkey Boy. And this was a term that was dubbed way beyond.
Zeke the Monkey Boy.
Zeke the Monkey Boy.
That's like something out of a Rob Zombie movie.
And again, folks, let me just say it was a different time. So I am going to relate to stories that I found in newspapers and stuff of that time. Poor Zeke, he was considered very deformed and also mentally challenged for his time frame. And at the turn of the century, 1900s, traditions and time, like I said, were much different.
We weren't politically correct.
We were so far from being politically correct. But for a very wealthy family to have a child born like this in stereotypical manner was considered a mark against the family, a curse almost, if you will. So poor Zeke was locked away in the attic and was very rarely ever allowed out. Very few people saw him. There's a few small accounts by maids and butlers who cared for the family, and some of them were assigned to Zeke that have come forward to even say that he existed, because while there is a unmarked grave that's supposed to be his in the family Lemp cemetery, there's really no paperwork of his birth or his death, at least that I could find. So they did a pretty good job of covering this up. And again, they considered a black mark or a curse. There have been many accounts through the years of a deformed young boy peering out of the attic window, offering strange grunts and scratching with the fingernails and beating on the glass with his fists when he would see people, and especially kids, playing outside in front of the house. Now, some believe this boy was William's illegitimate offspring from a prostitute. I mentioned he wasn't quite the loyal husband there. Another reason why the boy might have been kept kind of a secret.
Say, that's definitely a reason to keep it a secret.
Another different belief is Zeke could have been William's brother, born to his aging mother, Julie, I believe was her name, which would have been in the 50s. and she had severe childbirth issues, which caused the deformity. There's been a little bit of physical proof, like I said, of Zeke's existence. However, many accounts, close families and friends and descendants, is about all we really got to go on. Like I said, they have covered it up quite well. We do believe that he died sometime around 1930s or 1940s by the age of 30, but most likely it could have been even a lot earlier than that.
This family history definitely seems to lend itself to potential haunting in the future.
Oh, it's a dark, dark history. And the house itself, like I mentioned, has claimed so many lives of the Lemp family. I've got a little blurb here called The House of Death and Despair, and that kind of sums it up. The Lemp Mansion has seen its own share of death and suicides, and as they say, if walls could talk, the stories or nightmares that this one could tell. William's son Frederick, named after his father's friend, Frederick Pabst, he died of heart failure at the age of 28 years old in the house. Now, that's pretty early for heart failure. The son's death in 1901 was greatly disturbing for the parents, and especially took a toll on William Lemp himself. Just a few years later, in 1904, Frederick Pabst, the father, close friend of William Lemp, also died, adding more to the darkness of William Lemp Sr., who was struggling trying to keep the business going and holding it all together. Now, William Sr. seemed to lose interest in running the family business and became more and more of a recluse. He started using these tunnels to travel back and forth to work and did not want to be seen. He asked that his servants and stuff would leave food outside on a table. He did not even want to lay eyes on them, or much less anyone lay eyes on him. His own health obviously seemed to kind of spiral and tragic during this time frame. By the age of 67, 1 month after the passing of that close personal friend, Frederick Pabst, William Lemp Sr. executed himself. He had got up from breakfast, excusing himself, saying that he didn't feel well. He went upstairs to his bedroom and shot himself with a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson. The death of the St. Louis family icon, William Lemp Sr., hit hard for the city and many others, as the city at the same time had been working closely with him on the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, the 1904 World's Fair. William Lemp was sadly only one of many German immigrants and descendants who had found their niche with the beer brewery, taking their own lives. One has to remember this was also the time of Prohibition, so they were trying to work together, and here he commits suicide right before the World's Fair, working with St. Louis.
Prohibition figures into a lot of hauntings, especially hotels and things like that. When we talked about Morse Mill,
that
was part of that.
Yep.
And then I've got one that I'll talk about here later, where Prohibition was part of that story too. So
and
they were violent times.
It may be too soon, but as we're talking about the COVID-20, they're saying that alcohol sales have went through the roof. I mean, often in tragic times, that's something that a lot of people fall back on.
I was going to say, in times of stress, alcohol is one of those commodities you can count on selling.
Now, there was also Elsa Lemp Wright. She was the youngest daughter of William Lemp Sr., the richest heiress in all of St. Louis. Her fortune increased when she married into more money, a Theodore Wright of the Moore Jones Brass and Metal Company. However, Elsa filed for a divorce in 1919, which was granted within an hour. There was something going on here. They had some strings to pull. Later, however, the couple worked out their differences and got back together and remarried. Now, Elsa suffered from indigestion, nausea, and severe depression, insomnia, and stomach pains. Now, this seems to be kind of a family trait. Nausea, the severe depression.
Could it be exposure to something maybe because of the family business?
Possibly. Some of the chemicals or stuff with brewery, maybe with it sitting on top of the cave system.
And the time frame, obviously, they may not have been able to
identify it. Yeah. Not really taking place there inside the house, but after the married couple had got back together, on the morning of March 19th, 1920, she told her husband that she was not feeling good, and she got a good night's sleep, but still wasn't where she needed to be. He got out of bed, drew some bath water in the adjacent bathroom, and he called out to his wife after hearing a strange sound over the running water. After no reply, he investigated, and he found her staring at him lying in bed. Beside her was a small revolver. Elsa attempted to speak to her husband, but died within minutes and supposedly never got any words mumbled. The death was not reported for several hours, which, due to the known issues of the marriage, did kind of cast a little bit of some shadows on the death being suicide or possible foul play. Now, there was a William Lemp Jr. who filed for divorce with his wife, Lillian, in 1908 because she was a frivolous shopper, and he felt was blowing through his money.
I'm not going to comment.
Yeah,
No
we're
comment.
not going to touch on that one. In a very public court, William accused Lillian of running out on him, smoking and drinking and partying and spending his money.
I've already said this once. Scandalous.
Scandalous. The divorce was quite vicious and notorious. Now, William lost custody to his only child, obviously going back to Lillian. Now, William was reported in court by several people that he was cruel to animals and children. Some of the neighbors and stuff had found pets that he had supposedly tortured even. He did carry a gun and often flashed it around pointing at people who disagreed with him.
That's how you get your point across.
Really, hello? He hosted underground parties in the caves below with illegal and promiscuous activities, quote unquote. And Lillian stated that William slept with a gun under his pillow, always pointing it at her head during the entire night, so that if she ever got up and left, he would stop her in her tracks.
This guy was a real piece of work.
Yeah. This family, they're cursed, I swear. I swear. So I have spent some time up at the Lemp Mansion. I think I have spent 3 different nights up there on individual ghost hunts. I can't say I saw any apparitions. I did witness after the building was locked up, which that's one of the cool things. They run a restaurant and a kind of a pub downstairs, but if you get a room for the night, once they lock that up, you have full game to the entire house to do ghost hunts or whatever you want. But we had just walked up the large flight of steps to our room, and down in the bar, we heard this horrendous clatter. And it was like steel pots and pans banging on each other. It's like anybody that's ever had a small child that crawled into the kitchen, raided the lower dressers and shelves and starts beating the pots. So we ran back downstairs to see what the heck that was, and there was a commercial coffee pot that had been pulled out, stainless steel, had been pulled out and literally like flung across the room.
Wow.
That there was nobody in the room. There was nobody downstairs. We even ran down the steps. We went to the basement where like somebody's playing with us, screwing out. There wasn't a soul.
Wow.
So we had that. We've had lights flicker, or not flicker, but literally the switch turn off and on. Again, not just the light going on, the switch being motivated to go off and on. A lot of creaky steps, like more so than just a normal creak, but like someone was walking down, passing you on the stairway. We've had some of that. A lot of edgy, uneasy feelings.
Now, didn't you say you did see like a shadowy person at one point?
Downstairs in the basement, and I've mentioned this on several of the podcasts, we had I call it a shadow person.
Yeah.
4 foot, maybe tall, very wispy, unable to see the feet. But yeah, we caught that actually on camera, and we saw it out of the corner of our eye. So we quickly just kind of threw the cameras up and we caught that going behind a pool table. It made a quick corner and then up a flight of concrete steps that led out to the landing upstairs. So it's always an interesting place. Out of the 3 times we have had something happen, each of the 3 times, one time in particular, it was very low key, but the other, some of the other ones made up for it.
Well, I think with a tragic history like that, you're bound to have something.
Yeah. Now I am anxious. I thought about going back up to the Lemp Mansion because they have now fixed up the attic area that I mentioned. Zeke, the monkey boy, was unfortunately kept almost captive, and they say that a lot of weird noises and children's toys will be moved and, that kind of thing. And I'd like to go back and try that and attempt it to see, because that was an area that was kind of off limits to us beforehand.
We're going to move on to Excelsior Springs, where I heard some interesting stories about a hotel. So the history of Excelsior Springs dates back to the 1880s. in the summer of 1880, Indians and hunters told Travis Melian that the natural springs of the area had healing powers.
Very common around this area.
Now, Travis Melian had a daughter who was very sick with tuberculosis, which, in those days was essentially a death sentence.
Yes.
So he decided, what the heck, I'm going to take the chance. We're gonna try to see if these waters do have healing properties. Within weeks of bathing in the spring and drinking its water, she found herself completely cured.
Wow. Miracle drug.
Another man named Frederick Kigler, he decided he was going to try the springs for, I'm going to say, quote-unquote leg affliction. I'm not sure what that means. And he, too, had the same results. And in no time, the legend of the area grew. People moved to the area. And within a year, there were 200 houses built in the area, and the town of Excelsior Springs was founded. Now, they built the Elms Motel there in Excelsior Springs. The first hotel was built in 1888. It burned down 10 years later, May of 98. Luckily, no one was injured in the hotel, but in the hotel fire, but it was considered a complete loss. Rebuilding began in 1908, 10 years later, and it reopened in 1909. On October 29th, 1910, the hotel burned again.
Goodness.
And again, luckily, no one was hurt, but it seemed like this hotel just wasn't having a lot of luck. Now, determined to rebuild, the hotel reopened again September 7th, 1912. And apparently has stood the test of time since then.
It hasn't burned again.
It hasn't burned again.
Yet.
It did act as a speakeasy during the Prohibition years, which I touched on earlier.
Very common.
Attracted the likes of Al Capone. And President Truman even stayed there during his 1948 election bid. He sort of retreated to the area when he thought he was going to lose the election, and then woke up the next morning to find out that he had in fact been elected president.
He got down there and drank some of that water.
Now, there's a lap pool in the basement that is said to be haunted by a man from the speakeasy days. The basement, of course, it was said to gangsters would hold these wild swinging parties down in the basement area, out away from prying eyes. And supposedly this guy was killed by the mob during those days. On the third floor, staff and guests have seen a maid dressed in a 1920s style uniform. She is benevolent. Supposedly she's there to watch over the housekeeping staff and ensure that they're doing their job to their absolute best.
Ooh, keep them in check.
She doesn't really do anything bad. There's also the spirit of a woman who is said to be walking through the hotel looking for her child. She appears to be distressed, and she's been known to pull hair and throw things at people. Now, there are guests and staff of the hotel also report a feeling of an unearthly presence in several different areas of the hotel, and there are lots of unexplained noises. And, of course, with an older building, who's to say?
Right. Well, I mean, while we're talking about Missouri hauntings, I think another mention, at least a little shout out, would be, we've talked about this one several times, Zombie Road.
Oh, yeah.
In Wildwood up near St. Louis.
And that was also featured in a document. Actually, one of the few that I ever felt to be
creepy.
Like some of the stuff in that one, I will say, before we get too far into this, and you may talk about it, but the photo of the people on the hill in the trees.
I call them the children.
Yeah, the children in the trees. If you can find that picture online and read the story of that, and like I said, you might touch on it a little bit. I don't know what you've got here, but that picture alone is worth watching the whole show for.
It is.
Then there's a scene on the bridge where there's like a shadowy mass. And I mean, they film it. Like, you can see it in the video.
It's some of the best footage that I've actually saw for around here. It's a portion of what's called Rock Hollow Trail in Wildwood, and it is said to be watched by the Shadow People. Now, we've talked about Shadow People in some of our other podcasts and stuff, but it's a 2.3-mile section of old railroad tracks, and is one of the largest American Indian mound sites in the area, which
you'd think the
might
whole country
be
was built
kind
on
of
Indian
connected,
burial grounds.
right? It was walked by settlers crossing the country and was used by the Union Army during the Civil War. Ghostly apparitions that haunt Zombie Road watch from the trees, it seems like. As Bill had mentioned, there's a picture that no amount of words is ever going to do it justice.
You can't really describe it.
But it's like several children. I would say 12 or 15. I
Oh,
think they're
yeah.
like holding
Between
hands.
you see one between every tree,
And they're just like
in the forest.
they just appear like almost out of the trees, out of the earth,
Yeah.
and they're peering down at you.
it's creepy.
It's creepy. But that area, I am told, is now owned by part of the city or something. It's a park. They do close it up at
I
dusk.
was going to say you're not allowed to go there at night. I know
It's
that.
a big no-no. Here about 5-6 years ago, it was kind of open, and you could go up and do ghost hunts or whatever you wanted to do. But they were having a lot of damage and people getting up there and drinking parties and trashing things. And,
Stupid people got to ruin it for
They got to
everybody.
run it for everybody. But Zombie Road definitely is another hot spot here in Missouri. That's really pretty cool.
Well, when I was doing the research for Missouri's Haunted Waterways, which was, way back in the early days, I came upon this story from Creve Coeur, which I'm sure I'm going to say that wrong, but it's French.
French.
But legend has it that there was a beautiful Native American chief's daughter there, and she married a warrior. And like any good haunting, the origins are tragic. He died in a hunting trip, or he died in battle, or he was murdered by a rival. There's different variations.
Which story you want to go with?
But in her grief, she leapt from the high cliffs that overlook the Lake Creve Coeur and died in the water below. Now, digging around a little bit in this story, I found all kinds of continuations of the story. The most obvious, the most common, witnesses have heard her ghost crying, and they can see her apparition on nights when there's a full moon. All the way up until recent memory, people in the area have claimed to have seen her ghost jumping from the cliff, but she never hits the water. Like, they see a person jump, and then there's no splash. She even disappears
kind of
on the way
vanishes
down.
on the way down.
There's legends of a monstrous fish or a monstrous eel in the lake that is supposed to house the spirit of this distressed woman
Oh, wow.
that terrorizes the locals. Creve Coeur is French for broken heart, strangely enough.
How ironic.
And one of the local legends is, of course, when she killed herself by leaping to her death, it actually changed the shape of the lake into a broken heart shape. I didn't take the time to look at it on a map, so maybe it's heart-shaped. I don't know. Now, there are springs in the area that drip down the hills that surround the lake, and in the area they refer to them as the Princess's Tears.
I've heard that part.
So it's got a neat little backstory to it. Like I said, when we were doing the Missouri waterways, I found the story originally. I didn't feel it fit in with what we were doing that day.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I'll kind of bookmark
Tuck
that
that
one.
away for a little bit.
There's also a B. Donovan's restaurant in the area. There's a female ghost that's supposed to walk the property at night. And one of the most common stories, of course, employees hear a woman's voice at night after the restaurant's been closed from areas of the restaurant where there's no one at, the dining area or whatever. They'll hear
Where nobody's supposed to be.
Yeah, they'll hear a women's voice pretty often. And they'll often hear footsteps on the stairs and noises from the attic. Now, one of the things the owner talked about, he would find little holes in the ceiling. And he chalks it up to the ghost. That seemed a little too physical for me. But he said, and he patches it up, and then he'll find another one sometime later. So something is putting little holes in the ceiling. Now, whether that be ghost or something else.
When you first started mentioning it, and because it was an old restaurant, I was thinking maybe old gunshots or something.
Maybe.
Old 22 shells or something.
Well,
Well, another mention, I think, up in the Jefferson City area would have to be the Missouri State Penitentiary. That's another hot spot. Driving down I-44 and different highways, you'll even see big billboards up where they're doing ghost tours and everything. It was built in 1836. It was known as the bloodiest 47 acres in America, and once was the largest prison in the entire United States. It housed over 5,200 inmates at its peak. However, this 183-year-old facility is now far from its peak. It belongs to apparitional sightings, unexplained sounds, horrifying stories. And whether the spirits belong to the victim of a 1954 prison riot, which I was told was one of the bloodiest in history, killing a good amount of the officers as well as the prison folks themselves. There was the gas chamber. We had all the executions that was there. It's right there in Jeff City, and it's sure to make your hair stand on end.
One of the stories that I've heard that's pretty common in the solitary confinement cells, one of the pastimes that the inmates would use would be to pull a button off their shirt and bounce the button off the floor and then try to find said button in the dark. Supposedly, when you go and take the tour, they'll take you down to those cells and they'll shut off the lights, and if you listen, you can still hear the buttons bouncing on the floor, which, you know, if you're familiar with the idea of solitary confinement and the fact that it takes a hugely emotional toll on a person.
Yeah.
We are, after all, social creatures, and we're not supposed to be alone with ourselves for too long.
Right.
Apparently, you know, that energy kind of seeps in. We're going to wrap up here really quick, but before we finish, one thing I want to add, not really so much haunting, but, and I think you and I have talked about this, St. Joseph, Missouri, up by Kansas City, the Glore Psychiatric Museum.
Yes.
Now, I've gone there, and I will say, you know, you pay your money, you take your tour. It's not, I don't think there's lots of claims for it to be haunted. I think there's some stories out there, but I will say genuinely creepy. Like I personally felt
firsthand.
If I was in a place that was haunted, this was going to be it. Some of the items they have, and some you know, one of the things that stands out is there was a schizophrenic patient who was writing little notes and putting them in the back of a television, and it's just
full of these little notes,
and they've got them out on display, and it's just really, you know, I understand these people were sick, but also understand that in the early days of mental health, we did some really crude things to people. Yeah. My kids, you know, my oldest son, for a while was a very emotional young man, and things like that. Like, there were things he saw that almost moved him to tears there.
Well, definitely, by definition of today, torture.
Yeah.
I mean, torture.
And again, I'm not saying I saw anything, but just the feel of the place. And it is like, there are lists, you know, like, oh, if you want to see the top 10 creepy places to visit before you die, it pops up on a lot of those lists. So I'm not saying it's haunted. I'm not saying I saw anything, but I will say for a genuinely unsettling experience, that would be a place to visit.
That sounds like it's right up my alley. I'm going to have to make that trip. Well, we definitely hope that you've enjoyed yet another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway, and we thank you very much for your support. Hey, this is Eric, and I just wanted to give a little reach out and a plug to our first paying sponsor for Nightmares on the Lost Highway. That's our little family toy and gaming shop here in Lebanon, Missouri, called Raven's Loft. If you happen to be in the central Missouri area, please check us out. We have 2 locations. First one is at 223 West Commercial, downtown Lebanon. We've also branched out to a second location out at the Heartland Antique Mall, also here in Lebanon. You're going to find all kinds of vintage toys, Star Wars, Star Trek, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Mego, Universal Monsters, all types of gaming, board games, Magic the Gathering. So we would appreciate it if you'd stop by. You can like our Facebook page. Swing by and check us out. Thank you so much. I would like to thank Alex Tudor, who has been helping us a lot with our endeavors on this podcast.
You could call him our producer at this point, I think.
Our producer, electronic recording technician. He's the one that's setting up all the mics and the hardware in the background. And then Bill Weirs is going through, taking his time to try to clean and edit this up and give us the best possible version that we can present to you folks. Want to thank everybody involved with that.